Yes.
I think one of the key traits is to be willing. So to actually take the opportunities to actually be courageous. Because if we're not willing to embrace it, then we're going to be struggling. So it's the willingness to be reflective, and the willingness to change, and the willingness to take the school community with you in terms of, you know, how you feel that the children, the families are going to benefit most from the education that you provide. So I think there's both generic and specific aspects to being courageous. So from a generic, we need to read, we need to understand what's going on in the world in terms of, you know, you can look at it from job opportunities, but also in terms of the skills that children need, you know, moving forward. And it's the loving to learn, as well as looking at careers, etc. And then more specifically, it's in the school context, you know, in which you serve. So it's the demographic, the nature of the children's needs, how that community looks at aspiration, whatever that might mean. It might mean academic, it might mean vocational. So I suppose a key word that keeps coming up in this discussion is that word ambition, and how schools determine what the ambition is, and then to think about how well do we as a school marry up to that ambition.
Right. And do you think then that, just trying to think about the start point for, if you're going to a school and you're advising the senior leadership team on how to be courageous and ambitious, what would the start point be? Would that start point be looking at the context of the school and trying to identify what the needs of the children coming into school actually are? Would that be would be your sort of start point, or are you looking at it from a more of a top-down start point and saying, well, this is the curriculum that we need to deliver? Where would you be advising them to start?
Certainly from a contextual viewpoint, we need to understand where the school sits, but a school is a school is a school. So therefore the curriculum and what you want the rationale for that curriculum or the intent of that curriculum, I think that has to be the starting point. Because you define the purpose, what you want the curriculum to deliver, you can then think about, so how well is that going towards, you know, meeting our ambition? So I suppose the starting point is really thinking about how we want to design this curriculum offer through different subjects, through different skills, through different pathways, different approaches, to give the outcomes, not necessarily in terms of you know, tests, results, but the outcomes of the curriculum, to give the children the best springboard, you know, into adult life.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think people are talking about quite a bit now is about the relevance of that to the students in the school. So how do they bring that relevance into what you've just talked about? Is there a good way into trying to make sure that whatever you design is relevant for the children in the school?
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned earlier two words, didn't we? Generic and specific. So I suppose you can take a generic look in on the school community and the nature of the, you know, the children's needs, learning difficulties, barriers, successes, etc. But then it's also in the individual classroom or the individual group of students that we're talking about. So how does the teaching enable the children to think hard about their learning? And also, if you like that word, you know, personalization or tailoring the teaching to enable the children to develop the schema so that they become both competent and confident in a range of different, you know, skills and application of knowledge.
And do you think then that what you're talking about is giving some ownership to the learners themselves? So taking all of that into account, giving them respect and things like that, and making them believe in themselves as learners, and being able to talk about their learning and things like that. Is that something that you would want to encapsulate?
Yeah, so again, I think it comes back to the key word being courageous. So, and linked to that, it's empowerment. So if we're going to be courageous and empower a teacher to deliver that, what does that actually look like then in his or her classroom to enable those children to flourish and to fly? Whether we're talking about specific, in terms of learning difficulties from a special educational needs perspective, or, all sorts of different learners. So how do we manage that in a sensitive work-life balance perspective? But we know that we can do it because we've seen examples, from around the world. So what does that mean in terms of your context, as the most pivotal leader, if you like, but also, of course, with your leadership team around governance, around subject leaders, heads of departments, etc. So that culture of that, it's not just about risk taking, it's actually about thinking strategically and clearly, about the journey and where we're going to get to. And often that means, how do we empower the students themselves to drive their own learning?
Brilliant. And I think probably just because we're sort of running out of time, maybe just leaving that point with people who are listening in, that being courageous isn't just something that the leaders need to have, but what you're saying then is that courageous way of looking at things has to filter its way right down through, not only through your middle leadership team, but into the classroom with the teachers, but then the teachers and enabling the students themselves, the children themselves, to be courageous about their own learning and how they make decisions about that learning. Would that be a sort of key thing to take away from this, do you think?
And possibly going a little bit further and also thinking about families and parents.
Yeah.
So their understanding of where the school is going and what they are, if you like, what are the most important parts of that, and then making sure we stick to the most important parts, because that's what's going to give the children the best opportunities moving forward.
Yeah. And you're right, and to enable that to happen, you have to have buy-in. You have to have buy-in from all your staff in school, but as you quite rightly point out, you have to have buy-in from the parents. They have to realise that what you're trying to achieve is in the best interest of their children.
Absolutely.
Fantastic, Jeremy. Thanks ever so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Some really good pointers for schools and for leaders. And we wish you well with the work you're doing.
Okay. Thank you very much, Malcolm.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye then.